On Monday, the City of Cape Town's new regulations regarding embedded generation come into effect. These regulations affect people who register. And there's a whole lot of inverters that aren't being recognized yet. And these are so-called off-grid inverters. They're not actually off-grid because these are inverters that are connected to the grid, but they buy from the grid, but they don't sell to the grid, which means you don't need to change your meter, whether you've got prepaid or any other kind of meter, you don't have to change it. You don't have to change your status. You don't have to change your payment system. You don't have to change the service fee you pay, etc., etc. You get all the benefits of not being on the grid in terms of feeding the grid, and yet on the grid from the point of view of being able to use the grid, just like you would for your geyser or your swimming pool or your air conditioner. So one of the things that the city are saying is that if you buy a grid tie inverter that can feed the grid, then and that inverter has been recognized by the city, then that means that all the wiring will be correct, all the fuses will be correct, all the breakers will be correct, whether they're AC breakers or DC breakers. The solar panels will be sized correctly for the inverter. There's 150 parts in a typical installation. And so the city are saying that if you buy an inverter that's approved on their database, then automatically all of those 150 things will be correct. And obviously that's not 100% correct. So this is the first thing that we need to recognize, that if your inverter disconnects from the grid, according to the standards UL 1741, and I think it's IEEE 1547, that were created in 1999, a few years ago, then your inverter actually disconnects from the grid as soon as the voltage is out of spec, which in South Africa we set to 210 to 250. In other countries it might be less if they have 220 volt systems, and the frequency might be set to 49.5 to 50.5. And so if the inverter is outside those tolerances, it automatically disconnects from the grid, regardless of whether it's buying or feeding the grid. Also, the inverter takes up to a minute to synchronize its waveform to the grid so that it can buy or sell electricity to or from the grid, from or to the grid, as the case may be. The first thing is that there's a lot of installers that are so-called registered, master installers, others, and you can see that they're making mistakes. I'm not saying they're all making mistakes. There's a lot of people that are doing fantastic work, but we cannot make assumptions that because you buy an inverter that's on the City of Cape Town's database list, that it's automatically got the right wiring, etc. The next thing that I'm concerned about is a lot of these smaller inverters, a typical so-called off-grid inverter that buys only and doesn't sell, could be, say, 10 to 20,000 Rand, whereas an inverter that sells to the grid could be 20 to 40,000 Rand for the same inverter. So it's a lot cheaper to buy an inverter that can only buy and not sell. And that means that this gives a much better entry point for millions of people who can't afford to have an inverter that feeds the grid. Also, if you have an inverter that feeds the grid, then you have to buy a special meter, which can cost up to 15,000 Rand from the City of Cape Town. Plus, you have to hire an electrical engineer to authorize the system, and there's a whole lot of rigmarole involved. So I'm worried about hundreds of small electricians who might go out of work because they can't install these cheaper inverters. And they're doing good jobs, and a lot of them are doing fantastic jobs. The next thing is that there's inspection authorities. One of the problems with these inspection authorities is that if you call them in to do an inspection, they have to give you a report and they have to send a report to the government. And I don't like that, because for the simple reason that, let's suppose I do an install as myself as an installer. If I was an installer, then I would call this person in to do an objective analysis of my install, and they might say, you need to change this cable, or I suggest that you change this fuse, and then I will do that. My clients might do the same thing, and they should be at lib to come to me and say, David, I need you to do this, assuming that I'm doing installs. So this is another issue. Then we've got the PV green card. People that have done this authorization, which can take a week or two, they're nothing like an electrician. In fact, in my opinion, qualified electricians should do these courses. But then again, in 2009, I went to America where I did a course and wrote an exam, and the NABCEP, now today called the PV Associate exam. and back then it was called the entry-level exam. And so, that was what I chose to do. And there were people on the course that were electricians, insurance people, bankers, all kinds of people learning how the electrical system works and how PV is integrated into the grid. So there's a whole lot of things that are going on here. As I say, I'm concerned for the small electrician. I don't want that electrician to go out of business. I want that electrician to be able to compete with their big brother. Whether it's big brother or small brother, they can both be doing fantastic work, and they can both be doing shocking work. So there should be an inspection authority that doesn't report to government, maybe run by SAPFIA, the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association, where people are paying to be members of that, and therefore because of their membership they can ask for an inspection, either of the design of their system or of the system after it's installed. And they should be able to be called either by the installer or by the client. So we've covered a few different things. The next thing is, the small print on the City of Cape Town's website says that registration is optimized if you have a city-approved inverter, and by implication, you can't install a non-approved inverter. But it doesn't say that you can't do that. So in my opinion, you can. And of course, I'm not a lawyer, and you must make your own decisions. This is just what I read. Then the next thing is that assuming that you pay the 15,000, you buy the reverse feed inverter, you then read the next small print which says that your contract ends in 2025 at the current price. Now that means that the city could increase the price or they could reduce the price. But actually, if you install a PV system with an 8 to 20 year repayment plan, you want that feed-in tariff, which is what the city's paying, to last for the length of the time that you're paying for a system, which is typically not 2 years. It's typically anything between 8 and 20 years. And therefore, in any other country in the world where they've had feed-in tariffs, typically those feed-in tariffs last 20 years. And if Eskom is buying from so-called IPPs, independent power producers, they're signing 10 or 20-year agreements with those power producers to supply them with electricity. So the City of Cape Town should be signing 20-year agreements, 10 or 20-year agreements with people that are supplying the grid with electricity to supply that electricity. The City of Cape Town's intention is good. We need to make sure that the wiring sizes are correct. We need to make the systems that I design and work with my clients on, we install wiring sizes one size bigger than we need, just in case. So, all of that leads me to my point again about South Africa. In South Africa, unfortunately, the small person is overwhelmed by the big person. All these regulations, if you're a big person, you're a company with 10, 20, 30 employees, no problem, you just hire another employee. And that employee's sole job is to make sure that you fit into the regulations. 3 years ago when you installed a system, there were things you didn't need to do that suddenly you need to do. Well, what does that mean? Does it mean that the 3-year-old system's not regularized, not electrically secure, not electrically sound? Of course not. I just want us to be careful. I want us to protect the small electrician. I want us to protect the small installer. I want us to protect the people that are doing fantastic PV installations on the roof. I want us to protect the supply chain. I've had my own issues with locally sourced materials from local suppliers. 3 suppliers, some of the biggest companies in South Africa, have let me down. And I've had to find solutions myself for things that they specified were possible, which weren't possible. In one case, I bought from a local supplier PV panels, 2 were broken. They said it's my fault. But if I'd bought locally from a Cape Town supplier with international branded panels, they would have replaced the panels the next day. And that cost me 7,000 Rand. So, and my client was very nice, and he came to the party and he paid half for the replacement of those 2 panels that were broken. And it was obvious that they'd been dropped by the supplier's courier, who was insured, and if I had been transporting them, I would have insured it. But back to the City of Cape Town. The city needs to make sure that the hundreds, even thousands of small electricians installing so-called off-grid inverters that buy but don't sell are supported, that those inverters are supported. The inverter brand name typically is Voltronic, and that comes up as a MESA or an RCT or a Kodak or numerous other inverters, all made by Voltronic and which all buy but don't sell. There's nothing wrong with those inverters. They work very well and they should be supported because they can typically be half the price of another inverter. I know that the city says that people shouldn't switch the inverters on just after the power comes back on, but that could apply to geysers, it could apply to heaters, it could apply to swimming pools, it could apply to air conditioners, it could apply to ovens, it could apply to lots of things. So the city's saying, well, there's maybe 10,000 inverters switching on after a load shedding event. And why are we having load shedding? No one's saying, why are we having load shedding? We're just having load shedding. Oh, well, tough luck, there's load shedding. But millions of geysers, millions of air conditioners, millions of pool pumps, millions of fridges, freezers, heaters, ovens are switching on when load shedding ends. And the grid can handle that. You know, if you're watching rugby and at half time, how does for a long time, Eskom and the utilities of the world could say, oh, there's 1 million people watching rugby right now in the country. How do they know that? Well, they know that, let's say, a quarter of people watching rugby at half time will go and turn the kettle on. And the kettle's 2 kilowatts. So 5 million people are watching rugby. Let's say 20% turn their kettle on. It's 1 million. That's a gigawatt. They need an extra power station to be running just because of people turning their kettles on at half time. And then people might be turning on their microwave. They might be turning on the oven. They might be going for a shower. There could be 100 things happening, and the grid must handle that and be able to support that. And the grid can do that. Yes, people can put timers on all these things. They can put timers. Most of the inverters have timers already built in. I think it's important, I say again, it's important that we support the small-scale installers who know what they're doing. They are fantastic electricians, independent, working by themselves. They are fantastic installers who know how to install PV on roofs, working independently, who know what they're doing. Some of them done thousands of installs. We cannot put them out of work. We have 60% unemployment in the under 30 age group, which of course means that if there's 30% unemployment in the over 30 age group, then a lot of those people who were employed find employment once they're 30 or more. So we have to find ways to get these 60% of people employed. One way is to be installing millions of solar electric systems and millions of embedded water systems so that for 7 or 8 months during winter, we don't use the water from the dams so the dams can fill up. We have embedded generation. We have embedded water systems. We can have embedded systems for our pool pumps where our pool pumps don't need chlorine and salt and are better for the body and better for health. We can have embedded food systems so we don't have to be dependent on international trade and international pricing. We need to localize our systems, which means we need to localize them in South Africa. We need to make sure the money stays in South Africa and doesn't leave South Africa. If we want to be rich in South Africa, we need to keep the money in South Africa. And hence why we need to support local suppliers. But as I say, my experience of supporting 3 big and small suppliers has been bad. And I can talk about that in a separate video. Let me know if you'd like to do that. So I think the City of Cape Town are on the right track, but I think that them closing this noose around small electricians and small installers is not a good idea. And I worry for those people. If you're a big installer, you could have 10 people, you could have 100 people, you don't really care. You might have 1 or 2 teams working full-time. You employ another person, they deal with it. You employ a lawyer, they deal with it. You're a small independent person with maybe 3 staff, yourself and 2 other people. There's no way that you can keep up with all these regulations. I also believe the regulations should come out 3 or 4 times a year, not every month. I know the city has been saying for a long time that these regulations that are coming out on the 1st of October have been scheduled for a long time. And yes, they have. But the problem is that the SANS regulations are also changing all the time, requiring new features, new capabilities. And all these things are good, but what do they do to existing systems? And also the city are saying, and other people are saying, that the system should be in the garage, so you can't install it in your passage in your house. But a system like a Tesla Powerwall is made to be put into someone's lounge. Elon Musk and Tesla have specifically made that device to be in someone's lounge. So there's nothing inherently wrong with putting something in your lounge or in your pantry, as long as there's airflow, as long as it can be cooled. If you put it in a dark place and there's no airflow, you're asking for trouble. But that's applicable to anything. So I hope that you're getting this message. The message is we need to support small-scale people who know what they're doing. We need to find a checklist system. Maybe if you're buying a Voltronic type inverter, whether it's Kodak or RCT or MES or whatever, maybe Mustec have their own checking people that they can send out, that you can call and say, look, come check my installation. If you're buying Kodak, you phone the people that are supplying Kodak and say, please come check my installation. And so this is a social checking installation where people check based on what's interesting to them and for them, so that someone can do an installation and then it can be checked by a group that will make sure that the installation is correct. And just because you're a qualified electrician or you're a qualified electrical engineer doesn't mean you understand everything about DC power and AC power, direct current and alternating current. So there's a lot of things to talk about, and there's a lot of things to think about, and I just want us to be careful that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're in a gold rush at the moment where it's currently cheaper to make your own electricity than to buy electricity. We should be allowing millions of people to install systems. We should be allowing those systems to disconnect from the grid 24/7. And we should be benefiting those people with rewards and making sure that the incentives, rewards, and all those kinds of things are benefiting people installing embedded generation, and not taking those systems away from people because we're worried about, are they safe? Okay, so I hope I've made my points, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe, and there'll be more. Enjoy the weekend. Goodbye.